Before we carry on, I want to ask you a big favor. Please subscribe to our podcast channels and on YouTube as well. This will help us to grow the channel and get more guests on board for better interviews and more information. Thank you and enjoy the show. Amber, thank you for joining us on the Context Pod today. Appreciate your time. We've been speaking a bit before the recording, and you said you've been doing your own thing for almost all your life. I think we should start at where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, firstly, Ettienne. I think it's really cool to be here and cool to be able to chat about our new exciting venture. But so born and raised Joburg. So pretty much there my whole life until my varsity career, which then I kind of moved to Cape Town. So I was at UCT. Childhood days, very kind of happy childhood. I think I was a little bit of a menace as a child. My parents definitely got their money's worth when I was small. I think I had an older brother who was 2 years older than me. He was a lot more chilled in our early years. Took on quite a bit of the sort of parenting attention that was required. But I think I always just had a quite a mind of my own, was pretty focused from early on sort of achieving and super competitive. So I played sport from when I was tiny, kind of all the way through my life, and still play quite high level. And so, I think childhood was happy. Older brother, it was just the two of us until I was 8 and he was 10, and then my little sister came along. So then I was actually the middle child, but kind of more of a motherly figure to her, which was quite cool. But really kind of happy family, and then came to UCT.
Two questions. You said you're still doing some sport. What is that you do? And also, following up on that, what led you to choose to go and obtain a degree in business science?
Yeah, so I think for me, so maybe I'll start on the business science part. So I was also always kind of very interested in psychology, like social psychology, sort of like what makes people tick, understanding that. And I think for me, the easiest route to merge my, I think quite naturally business oriented mind with the psychology piece was actually to do the business science with kind of honors in organizational psychology. So it was a little bit of a merging for me. So that was kind of what I specialized in. So it was really just a way where I could feed my sort of my passion for people into the kind of business space, which was a great move for me, I think. On the sporting side, so I played sport kind of my whole life, mainly hockey and water polo. I got to a point in high school where I kind of had to decide. I was playing both of them at quite a high level, and it was getting a little bit too much. So I actually just kind of stuck out with water polo. So I play currently for the SA ladies water polo team. So we went to Doha World Champs in February, competed there, and then we qualified for the Olympic Games actually in Paris this year. But unfortunately our spot kind of got forfeited by the South African Federation. So we actually aren't going to Paris anymore, which has been super tough. But still kind of loving it, playing at that high level. I don't think I'll ever be able to stop.
Yeah, I mean that's great. Being competitive in sport, being able to represent your country, and then also being able to be competitive in the business world. Early entrepreneurial ventures, you mentioned that psychology plays a big role for you and you enjoy understanding people, studying people. What are the lines that you draw between your early entrepreneurial ventures and the psychology of people, as you rightly said, into the business field?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, actually. I think, to be honest, like a lot of because early on in my career I got straight into the startup space. I mean, I never went corporate. I literally straight out of varsity, kind of, I think through one or two connections and networks, sort of started building a network in the startup space. And pretty much all of the ventures that I've worked for previously, I joined early on, whether I was kind of like super early on or sort of middle phase. I think I was always kind of there in the beginning. And I think it really just kind of was a showcase to me as in terms of that's where I want to be, and that's where I want to expose myself to that sort of exponential growth. I think areas where I've seeded in the organizational psychology, because I knew, even though I loved studying it and I loved the sort of hybrid between the business and the people side, I never in my mind thought I was going to go into that field. Like I knew while I was studying it, I wasn't going to be a kind of organizational psychologist or go into that sort of side of things. I think it was more for me in terms of how to get the best out of people in the workplace and sort of understanding what makes people tick and working with different characters and things, which I think I've really managed to use in my sort of pretty short career so far. And so I think in all of the ventures, really, I bring in a lot of those kind of skills in terms of how I work and the culture that I like to build in the teams that I work in. But I think probably in terms of the actual venture itself, I would say I worked quite long for a edtech company called Reflective Learning. Basically like an incredible, one of the sort of leading edtech companies in South Africa. They essentially have developed a maths application where it takes learners from foundational phase, literally like you run a series of diagnostic tests on the learner. It curates a sort of catch-up course for the learner to get them to where they need to be. And I was very kind of involved in the service department there. And so we were implementing in very sort of lower income areas all the way to private schools. But I think for me, I gained a lot from that in terms of working so closely with people in the service space, people from different environments, understanding people in different environments, the education system. I really, really loved that. And I think managed to grow quite quickly at that company into a very senior role. And then that was my last venture before starting my own thing.
Do you think there's any direct resemblance between playing competitive sports and business?
Totally. I think for me, I suppose maybe something that's interesting that I didn't mention, which is also I find quite funny. But when I was very young, like quite young, I started when I was I think 2.5 until I was about 14. I actually, myself and my whole family, so my mom, my dad, my brother, we all competed for the South African Taekwondo team, which is so crazy. But my mom was like the assistant coach. It was like a whole family affair. We traveled like all over the world from like Russia to Malaysia to Sardinia to compete in the world champs, which was amazing.
Well, that must have been an awesome experience doing that with your family. I mean, there's not a lot of families that get the chance to do that in a sport sense. So that must have been quite an experience.
Really, it was amazing. I think form's probably the biggest part of my childhood that I can remember. No, it was so cool. I mean, we literally like going into the craziest little corners of the world as well, like the middle of nowhere in Russia, freezing cold, competing in this like massive sort of like stadium. It was insane. And because I was so young, actually, I started when I was 2.5. I became a very young black belt. So I was 8 when I was black belt. So it was actually at that time the youngest black belt in the world. So I ended up fighting against like mostly like boys that were 2 years older than me until I was kind of at an age where there were other girls. And so the reason why I suppose I thought of that is your question around the sports sort of mentality. I think for me from that young age, like having to have such discipline and focus in the sense of needing to, like literally day in, day out training. It's like you eat, sleep, breathe, train. Like it was quite intense, but I absolutely loved it. And I think as a very energetic child, I mean, thank God for my parents. Like I had that to kind of to let my energy out. But I think that definitely formed my mindset in terms of firstly time management, like time management throughout high school, no matter how busy I was with kind of sporting, various sort of sporting things that I was doing, the academic side, I kind of was able to balance. I think like for me, a big thing that's come out of being so busy and being sort of involved in sport as well is definitely the time management balance piece. And so I think that's a huge one. I think the focus and kind of dedication, motivation, but I also just think the teamwork, like understanding that you've got however many different personalities in one space, you've got a common goal. You kind of always going to have different clashes. You need to understand how you're going to bring the best out of people, but you all want the same thing at the end of the day. And I think that's, so similar to being in a business team, which I think has definitely, set me in good stead.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you raise. And for me, there's two sides of it. Where if you look at team sports competitions and you look at individual sports, I do think both of them really bring something different to the table. You have to be more in your mind, and your thought process is different being on your own than being in a team where you have assistance. So yeah, for me as well, I'm not as competitive as you are in the sport, but doing what I do, mountain biking or whatever, if you're alone there in the mountains, it's much different than riding with your mates, and trying to achieve a communal goal, whereas you have your own goals. And in business, that's also playing out in different scenarios. If you're going into more managerial positions, the individual part really actually complements the whole team sport thing. So it's an interesting point that you raise. Well, let's go further on. You started a company called FARO. Tell us more about it. I'm going to let you dive into it and tell us about it.
Yeah, so I know it's if you kind of looking at it, the website, I think it gives a certain view on it. So to be honest, I think our social media at the moment definitely gives a better read. But essentially what it is we basically kind of identified how massive the overstock and return stock problem is, sort of from e-commerce, for e-commerce and fashion companies globally, right? I mean, you've got these massive brands that have to over manufacture, and they sit at the end of the season with a huge amount of overrun stock that ends up in the landfills, that ends up being burnt. That's quite literally brand new branded stock, right? And so I think we identified the problem there. And I think that we also had a good read in terms of the South African market being very hungry for good quality branded fashion items. And I think, since operating, we've realized that there's a huge, I think the South African market is hungry for that kind of a fashion kind of experience. I think there's a huge gap for branded fashion here that really kind of we've been able to capitalize on those two things. And so essentially what we do is we buy up the overrun and return stock from brands, and we sell it essentially in our store. What happens is, obviously, because it's the overrun and kind of dead last season return stock, we sell it for a much kind of lower price, lower than cost. And essentially when we resell it at a price that is still kind of around 60% less than what you would buy it from at any other retailer. So, I mean, from the likes of Doc Martens to Birkenstocks to Nikes, Zara, you name it, Steve Madden, ASOS, we sell all of that, and essentially it's at a price that you couldn't match in the market otherwise, and it's the brand new stock. It's just the overrun stock from the brands. So quite a niche, but that's pretty much what we do.
What's the view from those brands? I mean, obviously they're keen to go into collaboration with you because you are selling their products. But what are their concerns, and what's their view on doing it? Do they think that it might hurt their brand selling it at such a discount, or do they think that it's more a marketing thing for them to actually get more of their product out on the street?
Yeah. It's an interesting one, because I think that was something that we were intrigued by at first, to kind of know what's the brand response going to be like. And I think it's twofold. So essentially, I mean, these brands are sitting with stock that is hugely problematic. They need to do something with it. I mean, it takes up DC space. It literally is sitting and just aging in their DC. So they need to get rid of it. the world is starting to put bans on discardments of goods. So the EU has put a ban on kind of any discardment of overrun stock now. So the brands are sitting with a big problem on their hands. So the idea of, I mean, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the likes of TK Maxx in the UK or TJ Maxx in the US. So they
I
do a
think you
very
can give
similar
us
thing.
a quickly overview of that. I'm not
It's
familiar with that.
basically it's essentially the same concept, except TK Maxx is in the UK, TJ Maxx is in the US, and they're some of
Okay.
the biggest retailers in the world, right? The problem, I think, with these kind of these retailers is that they are positioned in a location where they are cannibalizing a little bit on the brand's market. So, for example, the likes of ASOS, the likes of Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, etc. With the stores being in the UK, a lot of the UK population is already kind of aware and has appetite to buy at full price, right? So now you're selling the overrun stock for less of a price. It does cannibalize that brand kind of market share a little bit. Whereas for us, when we're speaking to the brands, we're saying we are distributing in Africa and South Africa, where a lot of people don't have access to the brands anyway. Like nobody here, I mean, if you think about the global, I mean, the kind of broader customer, right, doesn't have the knowledge or access to importing ASOS. Plus the import duties obviously now at the moment are insane. So importing something off ASOS, for example, is not really a likelihood. Whereas we say to ASOS, we will be able to gain you market distribution and market access here where you wouldn't have had it before. It doesn't cannibalize your market really. And so the brands essentially would rather distribute their dead stock to us than to the kind of other retailers that are based in areas that do cannibalize. So I think that's been a super interesting one, together with the pure kind of issue that they're just sitting with in the sense of needing to move the stock and kind of generally sending it to, the landfills, etc.
But that's also interesting point you raise is that you buy it now from ASOS directly. So the way I understand it now, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you don't have the currency issue because you're buying in at rand. So you're buying in on a ZAR value, and you don't have the risk of carrying the currency fluctuations in any way. So your price is stable, and you can actually bring that product to the market without any influence on your margin, and also assuring the brand that your price will stay stable.
Totally. I think for us, obviously, it's a risk in the sense of, I mean, one of the biggest challenges we face is obviously cash flow. I mean, you're buying big loads of stock, importing huge kind of pallets of stock, and cash flow is just a tricky one, especially when it's tough to get credit terms with the brands and suppliers when you're still kind of early stage venture. So I think cash flow is a problem. I think buying the stock obviously for us is a risk in terms of when you do the transaction, where's the exchange rate. I think, however, once that transaction's done and you kind of import the goods, once the goods are here, as you say, it's not having an impact firstly on the customer and secondly on the margin. We're able to kind of then say, okay, cool, what did we buy it for? This is our margin, and it stays fixed. So I think for a customer, I mean, shopping on ASOS, for example, it fluctuates insanely, and the import duties fluctuate crazy. So I think it's definitely more of a safe environment in terms of that, for sure.
Yeah, and South Africa is very price sensitive, as you mentioned, to any price fluctuation in these kind of markets. Not only luxury goods, but also let's take anything actually. It's a very price sensitive market, whereas the UK market might be in a place to absorb more of this price fluctuation, as is the US. I think the US is at a state where it's not as welcoming to the price fluctuations, but South Africa is obviously very sensitive to that. Two questions going out for this is that the three brands, what are your top three brands that you work with? And second question, what are the top 5 items that you would say you mostly sell?
Sure. I think, look, in terms of top 5 items, that's tough because we generally have, I mean, we've got literally men's, ladies, apparel, accessories, sleepwear, underwear, footwear.
Yeah, well,
So
broader market, would it be people buying? Obviously, it's also seasonal, but would it be more t-shirts? Would it be it's a difficult question, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think we've got a range of kind of like a huge variety of items. I think what we've seen a huge uptake, and like you say, very seasonal, is this winter we've had incredible puffer jackets, like down feather, like proper beautiful quality puffer jackets for a price that you literally will not find anywhere else. Like it is insane. I mean, yeah, we've had down feather puffer jackets going for like 5.99, 4.99. Like it's crazy. So I think we've seen a massive uptake in our winter jackets over this season, especially in the last 10 days of it being absolutely freezing in the Western Cape. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would say generally our items are so broad. I mean, we've got really beautiful like handbags, really cool footwear, like a range of different footwear from formal shoes to heels, to sneakers, boots, like you name it. So variety is definitely, I think, key in our model as well. Top brands, I would probably say, if we're thinking about clout in the South African market, I would say Zara and Steve Madden probably they've got huge clout here, and we've managed to kind of lock those brands in. So that's been big. And then I would just say, in terms of variety, probably ASOS. I think ASOS partnership has been great and gives us a broad. I mean, because obviously ASOS have got a huge amount of the brands on their marketplace as well. So we get their home brand, but also all of their kind of overrun branded stock. So I think they've been a good, and also ASOS home brand being super on trend, but very affordable, like in the sense of when we resell ASOS home brand in our store, it's really affordable and the quality is good, but it's also on trend. So it brings a little bit of a mix of, if we're buying Calvin Klein, Calvin Klein's always going to be slightly less kind of faddy on trend items, but really kind of classic, beautiful pieces. And then you've got the likes of Pull and Bear, Bershka, Zara, ASOS home brand, who are more on the trend. So it gives us a nice variety.
I just want to understand your business model. Is it only online that you sell, or do you have physical stores? You obviously must have some kind of distribution center where you have all the stock. How does it work?
Yes. So we have a distribution center, centralized DC in Western Cape. And then we only brick and mortar stores at the moment. So we've got two in the Western Cape. Our first one was in a mall in Mitchell's Plain called Promenade Mall, super busy trading mall in South Africa. So that was our first store, a little bit of a trial store, a bit smaller, about 250 squares. And then we've got N1 City. N1 is 500 squares, so double the size of Promenade. And then we've got the Glen in Joburg, which is also 500 squares. So they're both big stores. So got three at the moment, and got quite an aggressive rollout plan. We've got quite aggressive investors, and we need to roll out quickly. So we probably going to open another two this year, I would say. And then probably another sort of 200 by 2030. That's the
Sure.
that's the goal. Yeah.
Sure, that's a big expansion plan. With interesting for me with the current market trend, everyone buying online, everyone doing Temu and 60/60 and whatever else there is. Is there a plan to go more online with your brand, or do you stay with the business plan that you currently have, being bricks and mortar stores?
It's a good question. I think, look, there's no disputing that the kind of online shopping is becoming bigger and bigger. I think, though, the South African market, the broader South African market, I think hasn't developed yet the trust in online shopping. I think it's also just kind of digital integration is limited, right, in the broader South African market and African market. I think people are used to brick and mortar stores. I mean, the brick and mortar retail model has been proven again and again in this country and in Africa. Obviously looks slightly different in the likes of Kenya, etc. But it's definitely a model that's been proven. I think the online space is tricky in the sense of everything that we're bringing in is a unique SKU number. So we don't have item depth. So we don't have one item in size extra small to double XL, right? It's like one item, one size. So it's a little bit of like find your hidden treasure, licorice, all sorts type of elements. So doing that online operationally is tricky. But I also just think, like, from what we've seen, the excitement that people have in coming into the store experience we've created. So I think something that's interesting to touch on is we, from the beginning, have kind of wanted to give South Africans a dignified shopping experience. So people that generally wouldn't be able to afford the likes of a Zara, is to provide them with a shopping experience that feels dignified. And it's like, you walk into a FARO, it's beautiful, the interiors are done nicely, it's a really nice, calm, sort of elevated shopping experience. So there's an element of aspiration attached to it. So creating that whole, like, kind of in-person feel, hear, sound, touch experience, I think has actually really helped us build a brand in the way that we want to, which I think is a lot trickier to do online. So it seems as though the sort of aspirational element of it, the shopping experience, it all kind of ties in with our brand as it stands. So I think we'll kind of continue to assess as we go, and we're building a lot of technology and AI at the moment that would allow us to do online sort of e-commerce going forward. But I think we would continue to assess. But at the moment, the brick and mortar is seeming like the right call.
Are you getting to a point in the business where you can actually get enough data from client purchases and client behavior to be able to order stock not to sit too long in your DCs?
So I think, yes, we are. It's quite a complex answer. So essentially, when we're bringing stuff in, like I was mentioning, everything's its unique SKU, right? So what that means is you've got items coming in, they're being tagged sort of individually. It does pose a challenge to, or at least initially, it poses a challenge to not necessarily being able to get the level of granular data that we would want, because you're sending things to stores that are unique SKUs that aren't attached to a specific style, right? So you don't have one style and then you've got 5,000 items of that one style that were created. You've got a sizing curve and you distribute them to different stores and you track its performance, right? For us, you send one pink sort of crew neck sweater to Promenade Mall, right? And you can see whether that sells or not, but that's the only reference point to that style. The second thing is that in the system, you have to tag every single individual item down to the most granular level of information. So for example, like that pink sweater, you would have an SKU, you would have the cat 1 or the kind of high cat level, you'd have subcategory, then you would have style, and then you would go into like literally color. Does it have zips on it? Does it have print on it? Where's the print? So like the tiniest granular detail to then be able to track, and this is where it becomes actually a strength, is if we are able to do this, which we're building the technology for as we speak, you are able to track the granular trends down to, does the customer in Promenade like jackets with zips on them or jackets without zips on them? So when items are coming into the DC, we're able to scan them in, tag them, and we can distribute stock according to that kind of granular customer data, which I think will be hugely valuable. But it is a monster of a project. So yeah, I think that's kind of where we are at the moment. But with the data currently, we are still able to get a good read on down to a specific level, kind of, where things are, which guides are buying a lot.
Yeah, so it's a lot of randomized data. As you say, you don't have a lot of one item. So it's a lot of randomized data points which you actually need to. And then it's interesting that you can go and say, listen, customers prefer a jacket with a zip or with buttons. I mean, that's something, that's a different thought process than customers preferring yellow or black or pink jackets. So it's interesting data that you gain, and a different approach. I would assume that you take then to different people doing also in the industry the same thing. What are your top 3 challenges that you would say in the business at the moment?
I think the unique items, like the individual SKUs, I think that's definitely a challenge. Also, that leads on to sizing curve, right? Like, it's very hard for us to get our sizing curve in the store right. So I think that's definitely something that we're facing at the moment. I think the cash flow element is something that is tricky. Just like I mentioned, getting the kind of credit terms as a early stage ventures is tough, and so like cash flow is something we're having to have really tight sights on. And then I would probably say finding the right talent, just finding the right talent at the right time, knowing when the right time is to expand, and yeah, just finding really kind of strong talent at the right price is a constant battle.
Yeah, and logistics, I would assume, would also be something in your business that is, because that's something eating up margins quite quickly. How do you go about keeping that all on track? Do you have your own vehicles on the road distributing? Do you use another company? And obviously, how does it work around that? How do you go about keeping that margins as tight as possible and as stable as possible for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think what we have done is we did a huge amount of research when we expanded to Gauteng to say, okay, are we going to have a distribution center there as well as in the Western Cape, or centralize our DC here and kind of more regularly distribute there? I think it was an absolute no-brainer to have a centralized DC in the Western Cape. So we are kind of doing quite heavy logistics. We are bringing it all in-house though. So at the moment we've got everything in the Western Cape is totally in-house. And at the moment we're building the capability to have all of our own vehicles, all of our own kind of in-house logistics. Essentially, I think that's the only way to go to save the margin for sure.
Yeah, in that sense, I think as you say, that's the only way to actually keep that cost down and keep your hand on that cost, because that's something that could run away quite quickly and damage the margins quite highly. If you could change something, if there is something that you could change in the journey of entrepreneurship and business that you've been on, I mean, there might be several things or there might be nothing. What would it be?
I think for me personally, it would probably be having early on in my career strong kind of female founders as a reference point. I think, as a kind of young female entrepreneur, I think we're seeing more and more female founders. Like today, I mean, I just think about the network that we've managed to create is kind of becoming substantial. But I think it would have saved me a lot of sort of the internal journey, I suppose, of learning to take up space as a female founder and making sure you have a seat at the table and things like that. I think having a reference point to strong female founders would have definitely be something that would have helped me.
Yeah, the industry is quite different in a way that it's different being a female walking into a boardroom to raise capital than being a male doing the same thing, and the approach there too. So yeah, that's maybe some good advice for someone that's looking at going on their own journey and being a female is get mentorship. I think from my side, anyone who wants to venture into doing their own thing should have mentorship. I realized this as well a bit later, but because at some stage in your life you think that you know everything and you can figure everything out, which is true, but in a sense that you need someone to mentor you through the right process and the right process, the thought process to get to a conclusion that actually makes sense. So that's a very valuable point you raised. If you have to have one piece of advice, except for having mentorship, for individuals who want to start their own journey, who want to start their own business, might it be online, might it be bricks and mortar, whatever it is that they want to do, but do their own business and be in charge of their own income, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with the mentorship piece. I think for me, I would probably say if you have that sort of entrepreneurial juice inside of you, that it's probably not going to go away. And so I would, in my mind, like if you've got that kind of inkling that's festering, is to probably test it early on and start sooner rather than later. I think when you're early in your career, you kind of often have more flexibility and room for the setbacks to kind of be a forming piece in terms of where you want to go, where your North Star is. I think the sooner you can start, I think it allows you a little bit more of a grace period to kind of get going with the entrepreneurship journey. But I think, so it'd probably be to start sooner rather than later, and also trust in the fact that if you've got that drive inside of you, I think it's probably gonna remain there until you give it some airtime. Yeah.
I've listened to an interesting podcast earlier this week, and they said that the guy said it's very important to know that you need to fail fast. The worst thing that can happen to you in business is to fail slowly. Is for something to be there and a light at the end of a tunnel, but the tunnel never ends. It's rather fail fast, move on, start something new, do something different, than staying in the same boat and failing slowly. And when you get to 50, 60 years old, you've lost everything. Whereas if you're young, get to know the talent, what you're good at. And if that is building businesses and running businesses, then go for it and find the business that works for you. And if you fail, it's fine. Just fail fast. Cut your losses, go on. So that was very valuable for me because everyone, except for the Jewish community, mostly people think that if you fail, everything is over, where they actually embrace it. If you fail, they see it as the learning curve and you need to fail. So that's very interesting that you said as well. Do it and do it quickly. And if you have that inclination to be an entrepreneur, then go for it.
Totally.
Amber, is there anything else from your side that you would like to raise to the community?
No, Ettienne, I think that's all good for me. I just want to say thank you so much. Yeah, I think this has been such a lovely conversation. Really great to just chat through some things and hopefully gives you a little bit more insight into what we're doing at the moment. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks to you. I think it's for everyone listening and the broader South Africa. It's very inspiring to still see the growth in South Africa, seeing people building businesses and actually believe in South Africa, putting in their capital and growing businesses and creating jobs. Because there was certainly a time in the past where people said, no, this is not a good thing in South Africa. We're not putting in money, and we can see the slow progress of coming back and people putting in money and time and effort to grow the economy further. And thanks to people like you that's building businesses, providing jobs, that's a great thing. Amber, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And we will definitely have a follow-up when you have those 200 or 300 stores, hopefully soon. We're going to chat again and we're going to find time in your schedule. Thanks a lot. Appreciate the time.
I love that. Thanks so much. We'll chat soon.